Okay, welcome back everyone to the FPL Script. This is Season 3, Episode 11, otherwise our Game Week 7 preview for the FPL 24-25 season. We're looking at, fortunately, a very good game week for one of us, despite actually, I think, an overall poor game week for a lot of us analytically minded, or even elite managers, as it so far seems. How was your game week, JD?
Hi everyone. So welcome to the episode 11 of season 3. Like Fran said, a lot of people wildcard in game week 6 and okay, so tell me Fran, are we having the same issue with my voice or are we good this time?
That's all good, yeah, this time.
Oh, okay. I was a little concerned about it. So anyway, going back to my team, yeah, very fortunate. I had 3 free transfers and I had a choice whether to wildcard or to just somehow stumble my way into game week 8 and incredibly lucky with some things. For example, Robinson clean sheet was completely unexpected. Poro clean sheet as well, because it's and the gap is even worse, right? Because it's not just Poro 5, it's Poro 5 and BruNO -2. So it's even worse. So and we'll come to that obviously, because that's the central theme of our episode. But coming back to my team, Salah captain again, penalty. Yeah, I know the feeling. Last season had a similar feeling when he scored 2 penalties in back-to-back games, game week 8 and 9. So not too unfamiliar with that feeling. And Havertz's goal from 2 npxG. So pretty good. I think I'm going to suffer next week. I'm pretty sure about it. The past few wildcards, there has definitely been a trend where even if it immediately doesn't pay off, the next week seems to be pretty good. The MD is always good, but the outcome at least seems to favor the wildcarders somehow. Again, it's completely anecdotal evidence, but I'm sure you'll be hoping for that. But just have to get through this. Once Saturday deadline goes, I'm hitting that wildcard button. So let's see what we cook up in the next 2 weeks.
Sounds good. In my case, I did press a wild card, got 34 points. Was a really poor wild card week, including the BruNO red. That's that really. I think I was considering a lot of multitude of variations of drafts, like some Havertz drafts, definitely some Palmer over BruNO drafts, and sort of dropping Trent. I think I'm kind to myself here. I benched Guardiola over Lewis as well, which was really rough to take. So every day of that weekend was pretty horrific. And that's that. Am I still happy with the team as it looks now? Yes. But the ironic thing is I've already taken BruNO out of my team. I don't know when we want to discuss that, but
so do
yeah.
we want to quickly touch upon that, because I suppose we might not have time later on, but
Yeah.
so Fran, just tell us what exactly transpired between what was it, Sunday night and Tuesday?
Yeah, it's true. Sunday night and Monday morning. So I think at the time Palmer was set to rise, BruNO was set to fall the next day, as predicted by sort of the price change algos. I didn't really factor in the sort of suspension element in terms of BruNO's price being locked, but yeah, ultimately I decided to go for Cole Palmer with the hit. And part of that is because I know that I have Guardiola on my team. So when I look at, for example, team selections over the next few game weeks, am I comfortable for the most part, hoping that Lewis continues to play a lot whilst having two 4.5 defenders to sort of fill in, and then Guardiola playing most fixtures with Gabriel? Yes. And sort of that's what I ended up on, taking the hit, trying to take advantage of price. Obviously, it looks like a stupid decision. It is a stupid decision, I think, from EV terms, but it's something I'm comfortable with because when I was running a lot of solves and spending hours really on deliberating like my sort of move options throughout the game week, I actually quite liked going Palmer in the end because structurally, I think there's some value to getting towards Palmer, who's going to be a bit of a almost, I think, season long hold until potentially my next wild card. And when I look at the Saka spot on my team, I now have the optionality to play between, let's say, Saka and Son. I think much like any other manager who would be on this structure, for example, with a role free transfer, and they'd have more luxury, but I would still be able to do so whilst keeping Palmer. And it was sort of a bet on whether my Man City defenders would hold up. And I think when I was thinking about it, they would. And I quite like the idea of sort of having more captaincy options as well within my team. And also having faith, I suppose, in like low value options like Rogers and Dibbling, and then I suppose enough value within even, let's say, a João Pedro later down the line for me to stay within a team structure like this that has, still a strong forward like Solanke, still Haaland, who can obviously be pivoted towards Salah in the future, and things like that.
Mm.
And I do think a lot of people have pointed this out already, but yeah, there's a strong lack of midfielders outside of maybe, let's say, Spurs and Arsenal midfielders. But a lot of people are choosing to spend, triple up on Arsenal in a different way. And then when it comes to Spurs, I think people are still holding out on the idea of, let's say, Porro, Solanke, Son as your ideal triple up. So whilst there are some nice midfielders at that sort of 6-7 million price bracket, if you omit BruNO from the game, it's actually really hard to see a structure that would be viable to have an FPL that doesn't sort of look like my team would be after I've taken the hit. But obviously BruNO's back, and we'll see how people with BruNO continue to do, and I'll see how I do with my head. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, just for anyone who does not know yet, who's been living under a rock, Bruno's suspension was overturned because
Yeah.
it was the most ridiculous red card I've ever seen. And I wish FPL had the luxury of giving at least those points back. But as we all know, it once the deadline is done, it's done. So I have absolute sympathy for anyone who owns BruNO, because it's such a bad such a bad beat in terms of outcome. But I've seen worse decisions. And but only thing I would say is, so I spoke with Fran immediately after he did the moves, and actually later on, because I'm preparing for wildcard 8, and I looked at EV for Palmer's worst run of fixtures, I would say.
Yep.
Because Nottingham Forest has EV around 7, which is tremendous. But even if I look at the 4 worst fixtures he has, which is Liverpool away, Newcastle home, United away, Arsenal home, if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
I might have one of the home away fixtures mixed up, but
No,
just anyway.
Newcastle
Okay,
at home,
perfect.
yeah.
So yeah, so even for those 4 fixtures, he is 4th on this list, and the top 3 are Holland, Salah, and Son. And I don't know if there's been an update on Son's fitness, but Son actually might not even be a part of this list if he's not fit for Gameweek 8. So he could actually be the 3rd best option in that run, which is probably his worst run till wildcard 2, which is extremely surprising to me. And Fran has already made a 0.2 on that move. So that is also important context, I guess. But it was actually funny. When the reversal happened, it was peak FPL, honestly. And I know it was at your expense, but I'm sure you must have chuckled to yourself as well, because you can't do anything about it. It's done. And now you can firmly not back Bruno Fernandes again, which I suppose is one of the advantages of selling Bruno.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, it can turn out really poorly. Like Trent, I'm sure can get like 3 bonus points, some sort of crazy game with a clean sheet versus Palace, and BruNO can even do something. But I think I've fortunately, like, playing the game in the way that I do, I'm actually very comfortable like making moves like this. Like when I took my minus 16 last season, I actually like honestly didn't mind, because I just think that if I commit to a move, I sort of know the logic behind it. If it turns out awfully, like, so be it. But I'm still happy with the decision making. And part of that, as you said, is even though Palmer actually has a really poor run of games, which you point out, the main sort of option that I'm losing out on over that run is Son. And still, for going for Palmer this week, I actually have the option to go for Son still through Saka. And that's sort of what I liked about the move, that it's not like I was blocking myself from Son, but actually I can still go Son and life can sort of carry on as usual. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay.
Absolutely.
So one thing we wanted to point out too, as we haven't covered the topic without sort of significant updates, is, MD versus MO, and kind of keeping a track of how EV, I suppose, moves over the course of the season for both. What we have this week is not necessarily just MD versus MO for this game week, but actually the delta of the movement between MO versus MD over game weeks 3 to 7. So we've been tracking this for a while, and we just felt like it would be a good time to produce this graphic. Do you have any initial thoughts on what we're seeing here?
So I believe we already hinted at a sort of a graphic like this last game week, and I think the game week before, because the intention from the beginning was not to discuss individual game weeks, but rather to discuss trends, where you can clearly see, okay, this player is going up in reviews estimation compared to odds, or he's going down in estimation compared to reviews odds. Or you can frame it the other way around. That player is being more favored by market odds. That's perhaps a better way to look at it. So what we've tried to do here is look at both sides, where a player has moved up in the reviews estimation and where a player has moved up in market odds estimation. So for review favored players, it could still be the case that market odds favors them more, but it's that the movement has been towards either being neutral, as in being favored equally, or from being heavily favored by markets to now being less favored, or slightly favored by markets. Let's put it that way. So that's an important context, just because it could be a switch in sides, or it could be just moving from one end of the spectrum towards the middle. So one of the intriguing players from this list was Havertz, as expected, because it clearly seems like MD has also started to favor him, and the movement has clearly been in that direction. I'm suspecting because the more he plays center forward, the more reviews increasing the weightage for center forward position. And we've already discussed his outputs, not just in terms of goals, in terms of underlying statistics when it comes to the positions. And I think it was Gameweek 2 preview, or maybe it could have been preseason content, but we went through his understat data, and the difference is day and night between his numbers at center forward versus his numbers at center mid, which is obvious. I mean, it's not completely new, but that was one player that I thought. Do you have any players that stood out to you, or anything that you want to point out?
I think Rogers is quite interesting.
Hmm.
We did sort of mention that he's had a pretty big boost himself, I think.
Hmm.
But that's once again a positive sign. Um, Potentially Sun even is actually quite interesting
Hmm.
too, because I think we've tended to say, you know, when we look at, let's say, a player like Sun, that actually he's much more rated by, you know, market, but actually the gulf between Sun on market versus review is a lot closer.
Hmm.
And just like Havertz, that gap is completely tightened up. I remember when I was wildcarding even last week that there was a pretty big discrepancy between market and review on Havertz, and still a decent one with Sun. So it feels like, I'm sure this sort of movement, maybe not Sun necessarily, because I don't think I was looking at Sun on the wild, but
No,
definitely with
I
Havertz,
can
I saw it.
contextualize actually.
Mhm.
I can contextualize that for you. So, for example, in Game Week 3, the delta was minus 7.8%
Right.
favored towards market odds. Game Week 6, which is when you wildcarded, it was minus 5.5% towards market odds. So it's already shifting towards MD. And this week it's minus 1.27%. So, like you said, it's been a drastic shift, uh,
Yeah.
which is great if you, even if you don't want to move the slider towards market odds. Looks like Son will be in your team soon, or in most teams who haven't committed to a Palmer, Holland, maybe double city defense sort of structure. But we'll see how that turns out, depending on his injury. Poro is also there, by the way, which is
True.
indicative of maybe Spurs' defense being rated now by, or better rated by review, because I remember Elevenify posting yesterday that Spurs are the team which have had like 0.1 increase in overall team strength on his model, and all of that has been in defense. So that seems to be a good indication of how certain team strength modelers could be moving, and looks like the review is also moving that way. So that's good to see, because attacking outputs are certainly not sustainable for your defender. So I would rather have more of a clean sheet guarantee than that.
Yeah. At the same time, though, Madison's also risen. So I think like Spurs generally have just
Hmm.
seemingly improved. And,
Makes
and
sense.
and I think, yeah, when you look at team strength, like when you factor in the probably like 8 to 9 XG from the last two games, one of them being a
Hmm.
red card game, conceding less than 1 xG,
Something,
it,
yeah.
it makes a lot of sense that these are the movements we're seeing. But it's also just symptomatic of a team being good, right? It's not like, oh, they were fortunate to put up good results. So Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's just a good
makes
sort of
sense.
call to Spurs. Perfectly, I think, aligned with their great run of 5 games in a row. That yeah, they're definitely a team to consider. Um, any
What
other?
about the other side? Lewis is interesting, right? Because you've
Hmm,
owned him for a long time now.
yeah,
Um,
I
what are
have
your thoughts
noticed a bit of a shift
on the movement?
against reviews
Hmm.
EV for Lewis, and I remember when I was actually deciding Lewis versus Guardiola last weekend, that the
Hmm.
night before when I sort of ran them at similar minutes, Lewis was coming out ahead by like zero point 0.1 EV, nothing crazy,
Okay.
and actually did a same sort of small sense check this week, and Guardiola was ahead by 0.2. So I wonder if there's some sort of factor to positioning in that, but I still think that Lewis feels somewhat underrated because his XGI this season, I think, is a huge jump from any other previous season he's had. Obviously, we don't have too much historical data on Lewis, but
Hmm.
I still think that this is one that can be quite volatile, if that makes sense. Like I can imagine there's going to be jumps in a few directions for Lewis because we're not really settled on exactly what he is as a player, and obviously I'm sure there's like a balance of things that have to be considered. Yeah. What about
So,
Madueke?
just out of context, just for context, sorry, he went from my 1.06%. So he was actually on the side of review MD when you
Mm-hmm.
checked, for example, last
Yeah.
week, and now he's at minus 9.1%,
Yeah.
which is uh, not only going completely to the other side, it's quite a seismic shift for one game week. So it might be a testament to what you said. It's so volatile and it's so
Exactly.
hard
Yeah. It feels
to
like that.
model what exactly in what position he's going to play his minutes. That makes sense actually. And the more data we have, I suppose we can look at longer horizons in terms of, let's say, now we are looking at 5 MDs. Now once we get to MD10 or game week 10, game week 11, maybe we can look back at game week 2 to 11 or something like that, and then we can maybe assess if that change is seems less volatile. I suppose that could be the case because the more game weeks you have, the volatility will tend to be lower, just because the market odds sort of go awry at some stage and then they come back, and it tends to even out. So hopefully that will be the case. But it's very interesting to see that, because if I turn up, let's say, market odds to 10 to 20%, it's less likely that it will recommend Lewis to me, because on complete market odds, it is I ran a heavy simulation, and Lewis was, I think, second or third on the list
Wow.
with the minutes that I gave him. Yeah.
That's fair.
You mentioned Madueke, right? Madueke
Yeah.
has also been interesting. It's clearly, I think, the result of a hat trick that market odds is perhaps refusing to back down after that. But review perhaps never fully adjusted to that because it's too quick of an adjustment. We've always known that models are slower to adjust than market odds, which is why people often prefer a blend of market odds and review. But in this case, I can again give you the numbers for it. So he's gone from 8.14%. And I believe we had discussed this as well, where Madueke at one point was actually favored by review
Yeah.
compared to market odds. And game week 3 is before his hat trick. So he scored the hat trick in game week 3, I believe. So the data is before that game week. So he went from 8.14% favored by review to minus 0.64%. So we can consider that almost dead even. We don't need to read too much into the minus 0.64, but it just shows that um, uh, either market odds have caught up to review, or, like I said, review never really over adjusted to his hat trick.
That's fair. And I think the
Yeah.
for Welbeck and Wood, I still think there's an element of the pen share and like calculations between MD versus MO that I think play a part.
Mm,
Maybe less so for Wood because he's very clearly the pound taker. But what I'm talking about with something like Welbeck is review has like availability within MD, right? And that affects like the calculation of the pen share for subsequent game weeks. Whereas I think a
mm.
lot of the sort of MOEV later down the line is just simply purely implied from the short term EV, right, from a
It
player.
is.
So that's
Mm.
why, of course, like in the short term, when Welbeck would have like perfect pen share, that I imagine that that could drive some of the discrepancies, but I have generally seen a pretty big gap between Wood and between, let's say, review and market, and maybe that's I think like a Nottingham Forest team strength thing, maybe could be. So I feel like most team strength models don't necessarily rate Nottingham Forest that highly, and I think the consensus for most people is that Nottingham Forest have been a good team up until that sort of Fulham result, right, which was them basically amassing 0xG and conceding 1.4 in turn. And I think our expectation for Nottingham Forest is that they're not going to be a top 3 defense for the rest of the season. Neither are they going to be a good offense at all. So maybe some elements of their early good run playing a part there. But Wood also had a super hot season last year, and I'm sure it's also about, I guess, paying reference to what you want from Wood's career too. So yeah.
No, absolutely. One more thing I forgot to mention. Minutes could also play a huge role in this. So
100%.
You mentioned Welbeck, right? And in Game Week 3, I don't think Welbeck had all the minutes that he has now. So maybe there's an element of that for Welbeck and Madueke as well as Lewis. Because those all three of those players did not, and even Wood to a certain extent, because there were still talks of, okay, maybe Avoni is going to take some minutes away from him or something or the other, or someone else is going to play false nine, someone else being Morgan Gibbs White, something of that nature. So essentially, I feel like their minutes being boosted has perhaps led to this result. So maybe an ideal comparison would have been inputting the minutes we have now into Game Week 3 for review and looking at it, but we don't have a Wayback Machine, so we'll have to do with this for now.
Can I ask one last question on these players here? So for let's say Mikolenko, what was the main driver of that movement, or like when did we see that driver in movement for him?
That's actually an interesting question, because we've seen Mikolenko on a lot of wildcards, so he's a very relevant player right now.
Yeah.
And looking at his deltas, so they've actually fluctuated a lot. So they went from being market odds favored in Game Week 3 with minus 1.2% to minus 0.64% to plus 4.4% to plus 5.83%. And now they're at plus 5.5%. So it's clearly been a shift where he's moved from being market odds backed slightly to now being firmly review backed. So could potentially be a result of everyone being back, especially Branthwaite, because I don't know if market odds, which is weird, right? Because I expect market odds to be faster than review when it comes to these things, or even overestimate in some cases. But seems like the Branthwaite addition has clearly been a trigger in a review system. But to be fair, this has been before Branthwaite, so I'm actually not right on this count. The change has started at Game Week 5, and Branthwaite has not been back till last week, right? So
yeah, he didn't
hard to say with
the
that.
Premier League match, I believe. So
he started last week, right? Which was Game Week 6. Yeah. Keane was immediately out of the team, so Branthwaite played with Tarkowski last week.
Oh right, yeah, sorry, that's a good point.
Yeah,
playing Palace.
Yeah, so
I've forgotten, because actually that was like probably the first week I didn't own Eze. But I feel like Everton have conceded plenty of goals, and then the gulf between their XGA has been, it's probably been the most unfortunate swing, right? I suppose. And so maybe there's always an element of how many goals are you conceding versus how much XGC you're conceding, and
correct.
And that feels like that could explain the gap. But that's interesting. Another topic we wanted to go through quickly was just a very quick run of a wildcard 7. Now this is on default minutes, and there's a couple things to keep in mind of. Clearly here, you're looking at João Pedro. We don't know exactly when he's back. Would I recommend João Pedro on a wildcard? No. But the wildcard team as follows is Flecken plus a 4.0 goalkeeper. In defense, it's Greaves, Guardiola, Robertson, Pedro Porro, Dunk. In the midfield, Saka, Bowen, Mbumo, Carvalho, Fabio from Brentford, that is, Bruno Fernandes. And then in the forward line, we have Haaland, João Pedro, and Solanke. Any thoughts initially on that sort of wildcard 7 draft structure?
First is about Robertson. He is also showing up on wildcard 8, and it's a menace, honestly, because we are having to either set his minutes low enough so that he does not appear, or just force exclude him, because I recently found out, and I don't know why I never thought of this, because as an optimization problem, once you start force including, force excluding a lot of these players, it's more of a probability that you might end up in a saddle point. A saddle point is where an optimizer gets stuck because in one direction you're going up and in another direction you're going down. Now, this is only in 2 dimensions. When review is solving or an optimization problem, it's in 500 dimensions. It's as many players as you want, or maybe as many eigenvectors. I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into the maths, but I just had to say that just because someone might correct me. So essentially, the point is that it's too vast of a problem, and the more force exclude you have as part of the problem, it could get worse. It's not necessary that it will get worse. It could get worse. So I suppose a better solution that you could try out is just setting a player's minutes to 0. In that way, they'll never appear as part of your solution. Now, I have not talked to review about this, so I'm not going to recommend it without any hesitation. But I have asked review the question. So whenever he gets time to get back to me, we'll find out if this is a sensible approach. I don't see why not, but I don't want to open a can of worms just yet. Maybe we'll reserve that for next week anyway, because we'll talk about wildcard again.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Robertson is an interesting one because I still think I'd be quite comfortable going for him because I think he'd start most games than not, and the chances that he's benched and that it goes really poorly, I think, feel still quite minimal. And I would apply the same logic of argument to Guardiola, even though Guardiola is more important and the fitter player and the younger player. Another point too, I would say, is that it's quite clear that Trent doesn't necessarily provide enough value, even if you account for his minutes being great and much better than Robertson's, to sort of fit into a wild card. And that I do think that we're tending to see going forwards more wild cards with a beefier attack than a beefier defense, because you have the comfort that you can rotate with hopefully what is 4 consistently solid defenders. And I include Dunk in that, to be honest.
Yep.
Which is why we see someone like Greaves and then also Flecken. In this draft, I don't really love Bowen and BruNO, mostly because they're in positions where Bowen feels like the best alternative replacement for BruNO. So it is a bit of a tight structure if you go into this where you are blocking yourself from more of the premiums. You can't necessarily stretch towards someone like Foden here, and you're probably gonna have to downgrade before you upgrade again. So 2 free transfers to move any direction, and yeah, lack of Spurs, pretty distinct here. What I do like about this draft though is Fabio Carvalho. I think he's provided a lot of value for a lot of teams that are considering wild cards, and particularly for those who are willing to not go for Valdemarson and still keep Mbeumo on the team with Flecken. That was something I actually asked a lot of people who I was, fellow wildcarding with, but they kind of were pretty assured that they wanted Valdemarson for whatever reason. I probably should have trusted my convictions. If that's my only regret with the wildcard, I think that's fine. But Carvalho definitely does appear as a pretty interesting option, and of course we still have some other picks like Dibbling, and some decent other picks like Rodgers as well. Like if you probably backed his minutes much more than anyone else in the field, then I can imagine Rodgers could still somehow fit into a draft. The other issue, of course, is going João Pedro. I think Liam Delap, actually, in the short term, is a really, really good pick and interesting to go for. His pen shares, and I don't think it's absurdly high on review the last I checked as well. So if I just quickly have a look at him, I mean, he's got 55% pen share, so you could actually bet to gain a lot as well by going for someone like Delap. And then when I'm looking at a structure like this, yeah, you can definitely play around with the midfield a bit based on your personal preference. But it still seems like a slightly thinner defense with elite picks like Radio Robertson and Porro carrying it most weeks. Seems good to go, really. And I do really like the structure, generally speaking, otherwise.
So you spoke about Trent, right? And again, I've learned my lesson from last season with the Diaby and Mbeumo fiasco, not to just focus on fixtures, because I'm trusting EV to do its thing. True. Like you have with Palmer, which I completely agree with.
Yeah.
I just have a graphic with Liverpool's fixtures. I'm quickly going to read them out. So it's Chelsea at home, Leipzig away, Arsenal away, Brighton at home, Leverkusen at home, Villa at home, Southampton away is the only great fixture here, Madrid at home, and City at home. these are the fixtures from now till November 30th. So again, in terms of workload, I don't know how they're going to manage Robertson and Trent. I think with Trent, I'm more certain just because of what I've seen till now.
Yeah,
With Robertson, I feel like it could easily be that
that's fair.
Tsimikas is played in one of the Premier League games instead of the Champions League games. Because clearly, playing Tsimikas against Madrid or City is probably going to be out of the question. So you will have to preserve Robertson for those games, and it indirectly means that we are switching to xMins, but I suppose it's part of this wildcard discussion anyway. But seems like Southampton could be a good time to play Tsimikas, depending on fitness of all the players. So I just feel like Robertson is a no-go because of that. And like you said, Trent, the thing is, he's probably going to pay back all that XGI in one game week. But I mean that's such a wild way of playing FPL. Like I can't do that. It's whatever XGI he's registered, it is what it is. I don't think I'm going to go for him on wildcard, but yeah, if people want to go for him, I don't have an answer why not, other than the fact that going to Palmer, Foden, Son, one of these players is going to be extremely tricky with Holland in the team. So maybe think about that.
Yeah, and to be fair, Trent is still up there as an amazing pick. It's just
Yeah, on EV as well.
yeah,
So
like,
there's nothing about that.
I think are the defender available substitutes better than the midfield available substitutes? And I actually say that the answer is probably yes. But I might be wrong as someone who sold Trent for a -4 this week, and I could just be waffling.
No, but the thing is, before we move on, sorry, you brought up a great point. So, what do you think about going for, let's say, Lewis instead of Dunk? For someone like yourself who bought him at 4.5,
Yeah,
he's now at 4.6. Dunk is also at 4.6, right? So, would you recommend that? Because it certainly seems like it's something that you would do, right? It's such a good pick
I
with the
think I'd
minutes
go
that he
Foden.
has right now.
I think I'd go Foden. Yeah,
Okay,
is
so
the way I see it.
you've stolen my thoughts because I am going for Foden on wildcard 8.
Okay.
But because this is wildcard 7 and this is pre-international break, I still don't know if Foden is necessarily going to get the minutes this week. If he does, then yeah, it's the perfect time to get on Foden.
Yeah, and that's why I think Game Week 7 is nice because you just have a three-piece like fixture run for City that is just better than Arsenal's fixture run, better than Liverpool's. And then yeah, actually Liverpool have a good run on paper starting from Game Week 10. But you make a good point about the minutes around then and how even, let's say, a Liverpool or City or even Arsenal are going to manage will be interesting because Arsenal, they're kind of being run ragged as well in defense. And Gabriel and Saliba will have to play a lot of minutes because it's not like I think Arteta is going to be super comfortable playing Kiwi or plus Timber plus Calafiori. Maybe he will be. But yeah, I mean, that's also something that could be creeping up, right? Because Gabriel will play those international fixtures. What happens when he comes back on Game Week 8? I imagine he has to play because they want to win, and it's something to think about. Whereas, let's say with a team like Spurs, they seem like they could be rotating fine. Investing in them feels pretty logical and pretty safe, and I'd be happy to spend my money on them. So yeah, maybe it's consciously, I suppose you could lean towards their players because they just generally have a good run of games up until even Game Week 11. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of
One last question, sorry, Fran. One last question before we move on. So in this wildcard, I don't know if you looked at future transfers, but is one of the transfers Saka to Son next week?
Yeah.
In
Yeah,
Game Week 8
obviously, like within review, you have the availability issue with Son and
Son right now.
There actually is a gigantic gulf in EV for this week, right? So I mean, we're talking like 3 EV, which is more than a free transfer's worth, and that could be where you go. But that's why I like Foden so much over potentially Saka here. I guess what are your thoughts on Arsenal defense? Because when we, let's say, I generally think even if you were to run them with perfect minutes for even a player like Calafiori at a much cheaper price point than Gabriel, would you be comfortable, I guess, wildcarding without their defense?
So the issue is, again, I think Trout has discussed this enough that I don't need to rehash it, but we are playing against a field.
Yes.
It's not it's just a absolute competition to get the most EV. So even if Arsenal defense does not have the best EV, I want to get one defender, but like you said, Calafiori, Timber, Kiwior, no one has good minutes at a lower price. So you are stuck at either Saliba at 6 or Gabriel at 6.2 and rising further even. So it's so difficult to justify though, because once Bournemouth away is out of the picture, the EV is not that great for the next couple of weeks. So it's I think it's going to be ultimately FOMO that drives this. If you feel like there's enough of a if an Arsenal defense EO where you don't want to back against it, then fine. They are the best defense in Europe right now from the looks of it.
Yeah, it is
So
a really tough
yeah,
run of games though. Like Liverpool at home,
it is.
Newcastle away,
It is.
Chelsea away.
Yes,
That is like I'm not
it
expecting
is.
many clean sheets there, and I think that will be the ultimate litmus test, right? Whether we people who are more than likely to bench players like Gabriel,
Hmm.
are we going to finally benefit from doing that, or is he going to just keep on scoring in these inopportune times? Basically,
Yeah,
will be pretty fun to look at.
makes sense.
All right, shall we look at maybe discuss xMins? Anything interesting
Yeah,
um, for you?
I think Foden is the first one
Mhm.
because so anyone that plays UCL fantasy, just an aside that I bought Foden for this reason because of Pep's press conference essentially, and the fact that his replacements seem to be fewer compared to the start of the season,
Yep.
and because they are fewer than the start of the season, I feel like it was a reasonable bet to assume that he's going to start. With Pep saying what he said, I feel like his minutes will go up, but again, uh, when it comes to the league, because it's once a week, and then shortly enough we'll even move to twice a week when we get closer to Christmas or end of this year. It's going to be a difficult call. Like right now, I want to back his minutes, but I don't know what you think because I want clarity, and hopefully international break will bring more clarity. So I'm very undecided on him. But right now, if you were to ask me, he will be on my wild card based on current minutes.
Yeah, I think because Arsenal and even arguably Chelsea, so for someone who doesn't really want to go Palmer, I think in my
Mm,
situation, because I'm tripled up on City, I don't have to make that consideration. So I just have to think going
mm,
forwards, what are the best moves for my team that don't involve City players? So, when I look at, let's say, Saka and Palmer, I was comfortable going Palmer because I know that I wasn't going to make moves around my City players unless obviously something crazy happens and I maybe by Gameweek 10 have to sort of reverse certain actions. But the way I see it, it's like Saka actually has a really poor run of games. So do some of the Liverpool midfielders, and Son is the one who has a great run of games. So if I wanted two of those players, I probably want Son and Foden over this run, and then you can revisit players like, let's say, Saka and Palmer specifically on game week 12, right? Which is why a lot of people are eyeing up that wild card. Um,
mm,
but what we've learned so far this season, I think, is that because these players are so good, you can still get very much so hurt week to week. And you don't
mm,
have to have, well, at least the experience so far is that you don't have you don't have to have the absolute best EV option to cook because it's just unrealistic. Like for example, when Salah was the great option and everyone sort of moved to him, 2 weeks ago, he was really poor, and then some people who actually went for the lesser owned fruit that was actually still very much worth considering, like Sun Captaincy, in tighter spots, one free transfer spots, like they did really well. And I think maybe I'm just being hurt by the experience of the season, and maybe all seasons have always been like this, but that's just like my sentiment is that yeah, people have really strong teams, and even though like let's say a player like Palmer or Saka might have a few poor runs of games, people can keep these players and they can do really well as they have in some of the tougher games. But I'm sure things will average out, and we'll have good players returning on good games and bad players not returning on bad games, and hopefully we can enjoy life a bit more. But that's just been the experience of this season. But will I still be going for moves like Saka to Sun? Probably, and considering them, I think so.
mm.
To be quite honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think not being tilted by outcome is the hallmark of analytics. So we need to just stick to that.
Yeah.
Another player. So I'm just going through the teams because we have some players maybe to discuss. So Liverpool, right? The biggest talking point from yesterday was Luis Diaz started yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be on one side of the
Do it.
fence on this and state clearly that Luis Diaz will not start on the weekend. I believe so. I believe that even though there are Liverpool predictors who are much more skilled than I am, because I don't predict Liverpool lineups. So Pingreen, for example, being one, he was saying that even if Diaz plays 60 minutes, he would probably start. Diaz ended up playing 71 minutes.
Yeah.
So nothing to do with that, obviously 60, 71, but just saying that I feel like it's primed for a Gakpo start. And it's also because I don't own him. So yeah, is it wishful thinking? Yes. But it's also driven by some logic, and I'm definitely going to back myself on this one. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I guess my question is Gakpo that bad to not even get a start? Like I
Good
don't think so.
question. Good question. Good question. Because
And
because it helps
the
my
matchup
agenda.
prospectively within the Champions League wasn't bad enough or wasn't tough enough, I would say, for Liverpool to necessitate Luis Diaz starting if you really feel like Liverpool had to play their absolute best team, which,
Oh, this was their easiest Champions League game in
exactly.
the first 6 match days.
And you still had Luis Diaz
Yeah.
play there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, at this moment in the season, we had Gakpo playing effectively 20 minutes per game. But you listen to what Slot says, I think he's been quite reasonable. And I do think that he will utilize Gakpo. We've seen a Darwin start
Mm.
so far. I do think we'll see a Gakpo start. And yeah, I don't own Luis Diaz, but at the same time, I'm not someone who's like extremely fearful of a Luis Diaz start. If he does super well again, fair enough. But
Fair enough.
he's not one of the picks that I go to bed worrying about every day. So if he starts, that's fine. I just think actually it's more likely because Gakpo's not a joke of a player that he'll start,
Yeah.
and that's it. Really.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I just feel like the front three is, for me, is going to be Gakpo, Jota, and Salah. But again,
It'll be interesting.
we'll see how that turns out. From other news, so Calafiori played, and Timber is the one that got subbed at halftime.
Yeah, muscular issue.
Against PSG. It was a muscular issue. So do we have any updates on that, or is he okay?
Well, I don't
Because
think there's updates on it, but I think that listening to what Arteta said, I think it was precautionary as opposed to he felt he felt something in a bad way. I think it was more like he felt something at the end
I
of the game
see.
he took him off. So it wasn't like, yeah, like it was necessitated and he's been rushed to like an injury room or something. I think he should be fine to play, but we also probably just need to monitor someone like Ben White and his availability. It might be the case that Timber gets a rest, right? For example, for this match, and he gets a proper break. Calafiori plays. My question, I suppose, is if Ben White's back and he's fit and he has the international break to recover, when you're going into an Arsenal defender, and you probably wouldn't be transferring in any of those players now because honestly, the run of games isn't good enough, I would say, to just have the short term benefit of Southampton at home. But if you do that, I guess Calafiori is still worth the gamble, but I just can't imagine his minutes being as good as, let's say, review defaults dictate. Like, I'm not seeing Calafiori as an 85-minute player. I think that sounds a little bit ludicrous because that's, I think, insulting to both Timber and White, who've played really well this season. Well, not White necessarily, but definitely Timber.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, with Ben White, he's effectively surrendered his passport as far as playing for England goes. So
Yeah, exactly.
they don't have to play any politics with that, right? It's not like he has to fake an IB injury or something like that. So, like you said, my only concern with Timber always has been, and we've talked about that in our group chats as well, where overloading him is never a good idea based on his previous injury history. So it's always going to be a case of when he is rested rather than if he will be rested. But you just want to hope that the rests he get are in Champions League and in EFL Cup, at least till the start of the new year. So I would not buy necessarily, but if you are an owner, I don't think it's necessarily an issue you need to deal with right away. But because no one is wanting to buy more Arsenal players after Southampton anyway, so or maybe Bournemouth away is pretty decent as well. So I don't know if people want to wildcard in Gameweek 9 because Arsenal's fixtures turn. Maybe they want to do that. So wait and watch, I guess. Just looking through these players. So we already spoke about Carvalho. Carvalho as a sorry.
No, yeah, it's not really xMins, but it's a question about structure and what people want. I know your wildcard in Game Week 8. Are you wildcarding with Haaland on it? Most
Yeah.
likely? Okay. Because the question I wanted to ask is, a lot of people are basically looking at, the people who wildcard already are looking at Haaland as a transfer to Salah in Game Week 10. Are you going into the wildcard with free transfers, or you're just going to roll on 9 and then you just have 2 free transfers to Salah? Is that the plan?
No. So this is one of the biggest conundrums for wildcard 8 right now. And the current meta, meta is maybe the wrong word. I don't know what everyone else is doing, but at least in the analytics group, the meta is that don't even buy Salah, because it's not going to be worth the hassle, especially for people who've owned Haaland at 15, or since he has been 15 million. He's going to become 15.4, I think, tomorrow. So you're right. So there's going to be a value drop on him if you sell him now, or in Game Week 10 rather. So I don't see why.
But Salah needs to be 3 straight captaincies, right? Where he's by far the best cap.
It is. But again, maybe I can try increasing free transfer and see if reviews still recommend Salah in. I could maybe do an iterative solve where I start off with 2 FT value and then move up 2.5, 3, 3.54, and go up to a point where it stops recommending Salah in.
Okay.
And then
but are you ignoring
that?
Salah?
Will probably
you will be ignoring Salah, and is that your perspective?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
right
that's
now,
to
100%.
Continue betting on Haaland captaincy during that run, where the games actually aren't that bad, but just clearly aren't at the level of Salah.
Oh yeah, on EV, Salah is clear in those weeks for sure. It's just, can we use those FTs for those mid-priced play? Not mid, higher end of mid-priced or lower end of high-priced players like Saka or Palmer. For example, Palmer in 12 is almost a guarantee for me. Like I don't see any way I don't buy Palmer in Game Week. Is it Game Week 12 where his fixtures done? Yeah, okay, correct. So I don't see how I don't buy Palmer back, even in the solves. It's just not just I'm looking at the fixtures, even the solves that I've run. Once I discount the possibility of Haaland to Salah in 10, the next best option is roll again. And then with 4 free transfers, one of the transfers is bring Palmer in. So I just feel like that's a better way to deal with the situation. But then, like you said, I am losing out on doubling my EV, right? Because it's not just the EV difference between Salah and Haaland, it's going to be twice the EV difference. So it's such a... This has to be decided well in advance. Because I'm like you, I'm not going to have any free transfers going into the wildcard. I have to get rid of Joao Pedro this week because I've already lost 0.1 on him. It's been actually a horrible week for my team. I lost 0.1 on him. I lost 0.1 on Salah. I lost 0.1 on Ben and Diaz on the day of deadline, or I think the day before the deadline. So I lost a lot of value before wildcarding. And we'll see where that goes. But for now, I don't see how I'm going to go to Salah with the free transfers I have.
That's fair. I think for me, it will probably depend on whether Joao Pedro's available around then. Because I'd have to move into another player alongside DCL, which is not exactly an elegant team structure, if I'm being completely honest.
So is it Solanke to Joao Pedro?
No. So I would just be doing Haaland to Joao Pedro, Salah dribbling.
Oh my God. Okay. That's kind of a drastic change. Any other xMins issues? I'm trying to remember if we had any other news. So BruNO is back, like we discussed. I don't think Chelsea. Brighton, Van Heck is out.
Yep.
And he's out for at least a month from what he said himself, right? I saw a Dutch newspaper thing. Yeah, he said
we have an international break. So
we have an international break, which will take up an additional week. But my question is, look, Webster keeps proving me right every single week. I haven't actually seen him play 90 minutes without committing an error, honestly. So I don't think review is going to account for that, and I don't think it should, because this is completely anecdotal evidence backed by a lot of instances where it has come true. It's still different from empirical evidence. So I suppose my question is, does that make you move away from someone like Dunk on wildcard? Would you not consider Dunk if Van Heck is out for a long time?
I mean, I already own Dunk, but if we're talking wildcarding Dunk, I think
Yeah,
the value
wildcard.
towards Dunk is somehow if you have players that can rotate within the short term, that Dunk is always just going to be good in the long term.
Hmm.
And you really only play Dunk on very opportune weeks where good teams have bad games. So, for example, Game Week 9
Hmm.
is a good example of that. The next time I think Dunk has a good fixture is something like maybe like Game Week 12 or 13, I think even. So that's another week where actually Liverpool, for example, have a bad fixture because Game Week 13 is where they face Man City. So
Yeah, 12,
Dunk,
12 and 13
I
and
think
14.
Dunk
Actually,
appears,
yo.
yeah, Dunk specifically
Hmm.
appears on game weeks where good teams have bad game weeks. And that's why I think he's
Hmm.
always a part of these solves because we always see that sort of 1 EV or 1.5 EV gain even with Dunk on those weeks.
Hmm.
And hopefully, of course, he can realize one of those times.
Remember when we played Dunk over Konsa? Remember that time in Game Week 5?
Yeah, I do.
That's
I
that's
think I've been looking at some really good or lack of bench jam for the last few weeks. I've had a defender score whilst conceding and getting 1 bonus point for the last 2 weeks straight. And there was also that week where, yeah, I don't know. Season's fun. Season's fun. So it was Guardiola, it was Konsa, and then fortunately in the week previous to that, I just had no points whatsoever. So it's been enjoyable. The bench.
Oh, I forgot about the Guardiola benching. My bad. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
that's
it's fine.
actually
It's fine.
no,
All good.
it's unfortunate.
And now
Yeah, yeah.
review's saying I'm wrong because they're taking away my Lewis MD. Um, it's terrible, terrible plight for man, really. But it's all good. Any other X-Men's? I think one thing is just touching on United. I just want to jump on the topic of when you see a team playing so poorly. The only thing I'd say about Man United is that they were poor last season, and I think people were still considering some of their picks. In reality, yes, of course, none of their picks have actually delivered any points so far, apart from let's say Onana and some of the defenders,
Mm.
which a lot of people don't have any consideration for. Like ultimately, what is your take on United players? Would you actually go for players like Rashford, or you still think there's way too much uncertainty now with, for example, that Rashford benching?
Yeah, he got subbed today at halftime and looks like he's injured from what I've seen.
Fantastic.
So that probably ends the discussion there. But if he isn't injured again, uh, his wins are not
Yeah.
secure at all. And like you said, see, the biggest drawback of having a team which is not doing great is actually xMins.
True,
Forget
because
about
the
the
manager
actual
is
team
too
performances.
reactive.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And putting a marker down, like the final, how shall we say, the final stage of putting a marker down is benching BruNO. Because you know that if a manager benches BruNO and they play
I'm
badly,
praying for that.
he's not coming back. He's not coming back
Yeah.
from that. There's just no way.
Just do it.
So it's almost there, right? We're almost there. So what's left? He's already done that to Rashford several times because Rashford is not as important to the team
Yeah.
as BruNO is. I'm sure he must have been praying for that red card to stay, the 3-game ban to stay, so that he could have actually, done something without any backlash. But it's not even going to be that. Look, as you can see, I've clearly lost all faith. To be honest, I didn't have any faith to start the
That's
season.
fair.
I just thought we had better players, so we would play better as a consequence of that, not because of our manager. So it's a good question in terms of not just the EV considerations, but also do you even think they are going to be feasible on xMins? And from the looks of it, the defense probably is because the replacements are just not there. So Masraoui, Delict, Martinez, and Delo will probably keep playing till Shaw is back, and then Shaw will become the scapegoat as soon as he plays and we do badly, or he gets injured again, and it's the same cycle.
Shaw already
with
is
Shaw.
injured again, right? Unfortunately.
He is, sorry.
Yeah.
You are absolutely right.
Well,
Whenever he does come back. So, yeah. And
a tough
Malacia,
beat for England and the national team there. But
oh, yeah, I know, right? That's the only loss here. But just thinking about United team or just the players in general, it's the BruNO backing is how shall I put it? If you do own BruNO right now and you want to keep him, I do understand why. But I also feel like if someone wants to back against BruNO, and it's just there, because
We're
see
there.
the way you estimate expected value is some semblance of consistency in terms of starting lineups or players they play with, or something like team strength. Right? Like I spoke to you last week about United defense being 1.2 npxGC per 90 this season, and they concede so much npxGC that it went from 1.2 to over 2 now per 90.
Which, yeah, it was unfortunate, right? Like with the one game.
I know. But all I'm saying is look at the volatility in every single aspect of the team, right? So I don't know. It makes me feel like, and this is something that Sartalp and I have discussed previously. In order to accurately do simulations, you need to know the distribution of EV. Like how is the EV distributed across, let's say, assuming that BruNO starts and plays 90, BruNO is subbed in and plays from 80 to 90, whatever the range of outcomes is in terms of minutes. So I'm really struggling to not estimate that the EV error bars are much wider for BruNO. And I think review will also admit to that, because I'm rambling, but again, I'm trying to put it in terms that I want to understand, and also people listening want to understand, because it's difficult for me to reconcile the EV with the team as well right now. So yes, and this as a modeler, EV modeler, I've dealt with this previously as well. There have been players who've been on a heater, or someone like Mbappe, right? Mbappe playing for France is a classic example from the Euros, where people kept telling me, "Oh, why is Mbappe so high on EV? He's broken his nose. He's clearly not playing right. France is playing such bad football." Which was okay to an extent, but am I just supposed to forget what 4-6 years of football, or Mbappe's underlying statistics, or the fact that he takes penalties? Like, what's the line here? What's the quantifying factor? So I'm finding it very difficult to express this, but I hope people at least understand that all I'm trying to convey is the uncertainty is much more, and so I would consider that the error bars on expected value are much more. That's all. I don't think BruNO is a bad pick, but anyone who doesn't want to pick him, I understand why not.
Yeah, I think there's always like that sort of intrinsic value to a player, when they're on pen,
Yeah,
all this kind of stuff. Like
yeah,
you can
yeah,
just magically conjure points, and like
yeah.
you use the Mbappe example. I think that's a great one where you just compare him to Kane within the Euros, who was probably awful, but
Mm.
then like magically gets donated a penalty versus the Dutch, and then he becomes a good captaincy pick, even though
He
you
does.
can apply all the sort of logical points for Mbappe, but he still got the points, and that's because he does the pens. Like for example, Son,
Mm.
arguably in a
Yep.
pretty dismal performance, I would say, versus Wolves, and
Wolves.
and, and
Yep.
that's really how fantasy games work, right? You don't have to get points in a pretty way, and
Mm.
I think that's what some people are struggling to deal with. And yeah, fine, he's done poor so far. BruNO has, and so have United. But I guess how bad can it really get, and how I think it's weird to think that team strength models, that any sort of model really would not be able to appreciate just how bad it is. So
Mm.
I think there's also an aspect of, if BruNO's bad, how bad do you think he is still at the end of the day? And probably that level is still a little bit higher realistically, um, for people who are watching and seeing the really poor results versus what a model can predict.
No, sorry, before we move on, I know we've spoken so much and people must be sick at this point. It's just that one more point I realized based on what you were saying was, so models are slower to update, right? So
Yeah,
the team strengths are not going to change. And I understand that is the right approach. There is nothing wrong with that. BruNO playing 95 minutes was a given, which was one of the biggest strengths of BruNO as an FPL option. And his ability to at least stay at his price and not free fall in price. He's now gone from 8.5 to 8.2 and possibly going to be 8.1 next week because he's price locked now.
yeah,
So he can't drop down in price further. But next week, I'm sure if he does not do anything this week, which seems likely given that we are going away to Aston Villa, who just beat Bayern Munich 1-0, and did not concede a lot of. Maybe they considered some XG because of the Gnabry chance that I saw and the
Yeah, they
Kane
conceded 1.4, I
chance
think.
towards the death. Yeah, which is not great, but also not too bad considering Bayern attack has been on an absolute tear this season.
And you're
So
right, it was just one chance mostly.
yeah, exactly. So considering all those things, he is most likely going to blank again, and that just it makes it certain that he's going to drop to 8.1. So I'm just thinking if people want to stop the bleed, it's completely justifiable. But in terms of EV, I'm still confident he's going to do well enough over 38 game weeks. In terms of the goal and assist that is projected to score across 38 weeks, I still think it's good. But right now, it's not looking too good based on the team uncertainty.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair.
Yeah.
There aren't too many xMins picks. I will just say that, yeah, definitely have a look at adjusting around the Spurs midfielder picks. Definitely
Yep.
Kulusevski has really good minutes. Johnson has really weird decay. For anyone who's like looking at solves and looking at transfers.
Werner was bad again, and Odobert is injured. So I think you have to account for that when you adjust Johnson's minutes. And Kulusevski is not playing right wing now, so a
Yeah.
huge boost perhaps.
And I guess even some of the Arsenal mids I still think have slightly underrated minutes, like Martinelli and Trossard. They are definitely a bit short term, but if you're sort of thinking about yo-yoing around, you want to, for example, ignore Eze's 2 poor fixtures, sidestep another price drop potentially. Like there's that. I think those are the notes that I have that I would say I could probably bring to the table for this week. And then Delap I think is quite interesting too, because as I said, there's a nice gamble to be made by people who might be confident in Delap and his minutes, in much the same way that Evan Nilsson was as a pick, right? Ironically, Delap's already played above 80 minutes, and Evan Nilsson is still trying to get there, I believe. And he might not no longer be on pens, so we'll find out. But yeah, those are the notes I'd have. Should we just quickly run through some Q&A questions?
Captaincy. We can just briefly mention.
True.
Yeah. So
there's the
captaincy
big man.
is
Haaland.
So just to go through the list, it's Haaland, Saka, Palmer, and Salah, which is great. If I'm pretty sure people own at least 2 of these. So
yeah, some people even.
I'm assuming. Yeah. I was going to say some people who went early with Palmer own 3.
Yeah.
So I'm going Haaland captain because I don't own number 2 and number 3 on this list, and I think Salah is far too away in terms of EV to even consider. For you, it's a much closer call. I think Saka is pretty much up there. If you think he's going to play 90 minutes because it's the international break and there's no need to rest him, he's there.
Yeah, I've actually also noticed that on market odds, Saka's much favored this week. Much favored.
So let's do 89 for Saka. So yeah, he's slightly ahead on just MD, and let's do what? Oh, sorry, that was MO, by the way. Sorry, that was 100% MO. Saka is ahead of Haaland on the same minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
And on MD, he's actually even more ahead.
Is he?
On the same minutes. Yeah. He's 0.2 ahead on MD and 0.1 ahead on MO. Same minutes.
Oh, then there's been a bit of a shift then this week, I would say.
Yeah.
With Haaland ticking up a bit. Because I remember actually looking at the end of the deadline last week, and there was a gap of 0.4 market between Saka and Haaland. And maybe it's actually because Southampton actually put a decent performance for Bournemouth on XGC, right? Things like that.
Yeah.
It wasn't actually
so you're
poor
talking
as
about market odds, right?
Yeah.
You're talking
odds,
right? Yeah,
it
makes sense.
It's actually dropped that gap. But Saka leading, if you think mins are equal for both, right? So
yeah. Where are you leaning? Because my decision is pretty boring.
You've gone for Haaland in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an option, right? That's what I'm saying. Like,
I think I'm more than likely just gonna go Haaland. And
fair enough.
Yeah, I mean,
because what has changed between last week and this week, right? You went Haaland last week. It was a much tougher fixture with lower EV.
I did speak to you about this, but I think there has been a slight uptick in Saka's minutes, because I think we definitely was an era of uncertainty around his minutes to start the season for sure. Like I think even speaking to someone like Hedgehog, for example, he wasn't so certain about Saka's minutes actually versus like let's say Leicester, and I think he was even less confident about Saka's minutes the week prior to that, where he was playing versus Man City. Now, ironically, obviously, he played 45 minutes, which is
Hmm.
tactical. But then I think a lot of people were still using that as a small little, I guess, like acid test for what they think his minutes would have been like going forwards. And not many people would have predicted that Saka played as many minutes as he did versus Leicester, right? So maybe
Hmm.
that's partially because they had to chase and they're actually 11 versus 11. But now he's played a couple games of like 89s, even in the Champions League. And maybe that sort of adjusting of his minutes is something that we probably don't need to be that concerned about. Because I think, yeah, like some of the numbers that was being touted about if the game state was normal was like in the 70s, in the low 80s, which I think is still a bit of a reach over the course of
Hmm.
the season. If you're trying to bet on his minutes, as long as he's like remotely fit, I think you're going to still see him towards the high 80s and sometimes creeping with hopefully some finishes or like 3-4 minute subs. So I think because the minutes are closer now, then there's a bit of an argument right now that people have a bit more comfort in Saka's fitness, I guess. Does that change anything for you, or still no?
No, I don't own Saka or Palmer,
Yeah,
so it's I
as in
don't have to think
just in
about it.
terms of like how
Oh yeah, okay. Just
you
in
think
general.
about
Oh,
the picks and the EVs.
100%. Like you said, that's why I changed his minutes to 89 just to check, because
Yeah.
in previous game weeks I wasn't even considering that, and the 45-minute sub against City, even though the 45-minute sub was tactical, we all know about it. He did play what 60 odd minutes against Bolton in the EFL Cup in midweek. I suppose it was to get him the minutes he was due
Yeah.
against Man
Without
City.
having to play versus
So
11.
exactly. So right now, especially this week, I would bet on a full game, because I also want that additional game completion point in some other games that
Oh,
we're
I
playing.
see. I see. Okay.
So this might be the week where I think he plays 90, full 90.
All right.
So if it's like a 0.1 difference, I don't know how you're going to play
I
it,
think
but
I'm on
I mean,
50-50. But I
yeah.
think this is such a good opportunity to grab free risk for me. I might as well do it. I'm sure this is the one where it turns out awful. But
Or not, because Saka's had only one goal from great underlines this season. So
even on the sort
who
of XG
knows?
front,
I don't know. I don't think the XG has been too great. The XA has been
yeah.
exceptional. So
Like, so what do you think, for example, like people mentioning, like, let's say the low block aspect of things and like the shift? I
hmm,
think even like, for example, the transfer flow talked about it, right? This kind of like
hmm.
interim structure where they play a low block. And like, do you think Saka is someone who's clearly just benefiting from the situation, but still is just like clearly, I think, took another stride when it comes to like creativeness, I guess, in this season.
Is it that, or is it the fact that he has been creating so many of these big chances for Opta? But let's just talk about XA from
Mm-hmm.
corners.
Yeah,
It's actually been overpowered, right? Like I don't
it's insane.
understand
He
how
gets
it
to Gabriel
can be
every game,
stopped.
at least
What
once.
is happening? It's so terrifying to watch. I could not watch the game after a point against Leicester, because it just kept happening again and again and again. And when the ball dropped to Trossard, I was just thinking, yeah, this it had to be, because it just happens every single game week. And so the way the XA, you can clearly see, like, it's if you are going to be dropping a ball 5 yards from goal onto a player's head or onto their feet like 10 times a game, even though the nature of header means that the XG you generate from that chance is low, 10 times that is still going to be pretty high. So you can see how he's getting his XA. It's clearly with chances that are repeatable, which is the best thing about chances like that.
Yeah.
It's that they are predictable and repeatable. So it's completely different from let's say last season, where he has been mixing it up, but this season seems to be clearly favoring that. Again, I don't think it's going to continue. I think by the end of the season we will come back to a certain goal to assist ratio for Saka. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if that convinces you to go for Saka, but it is certainly free risk this week.
We'll...
Southampton have conceded the most goals from set pieces. I just remembered.
Okay.
I just remembered.
Well,
I just remembered.
I'll definitely consider it. I think we'll just put it there.
Yeah.
And
we want to go to questions, or
absolutely.
do you have something else?
Okay, cool. I think so. Starting from the top, I might have actually refreshed the chat page. I might have missed some of the early chats. Maybe if you can cover.
I can grab them for you. So Tiki Taylor says, I'm still going to keep BruNO and roll. So yeah, makes sense.
Sensible.
Mo is there. Mo's in the chat. Hi Mo. Zubi says, if Foden looks to have gotten his place back in Game Week 9 when Salah plays Arsenal, would you go there? I think people who went Palmer reacted too early. I mean, the question is what we want to address. Yes, depending on a lot of things. How many free transfers you have? What are his minutes looking like? If you are tripled upon City, like he probably should have if you wildcarded earlier in the season.
I think, as I said last week as well, like I was more confident in tripling up on City than Arsenal.
Yep.
And I think the wildcard 7 bears the proof of that, where we just saw a solve. It was defaults
with one
Arsenal player. And arguably that Arsenal player shouldn't even be there if Son was fully fit, I would say. So yeah. I think that Foden's just amazing pick, basically. I don't think it's not even I don't think it's even a conversation between like Foden versus Palmer, but yeah, definitely if you don't have a triple up on Man City, like he's there. So
Andy Martin was in the chat or is in the chat. So hi Andy.
Andy, hope you're doing well. And
yeah,
congratulations on your early seasons, I suppose, across multiple fantasy games. Pablo, nice to see
Pablo
you.
says, yeah, okay, you're there. So you can take it from there.
Captain Hunter, so I think we discussed that. I think rank doesn't necessarily matter so much, but if you already have a good rank and ultimately these are both good picks, probably the realistic decision that we should probably take is to take the risky option. Well, at least that's what I would do. Personally, though, I think some people will have completely different opinions to that. Like if you want to protect yourself, I guess, and you think that you're in a good spot, you feel comfortable by the rest of your decisions, you think your team can dictate, and your captaincy, you don't want it to be such a coin flip, then probably captaining Holland is the best option for you. Thank you, KS Mai. Someone took a hit for BruNO TA to Palmer Davies. That's literally what I did. I probably...
Yo, okay. It took me a second to realize. Oh my god.
I think it's fine. I've taken hits before. You can...
Like... No. I meant that's the exact same hit you took.
Oh, no. I'm just trying to tell this person that you can survive life after a hit.
You don't
says he wants to take BruNO out so badly. Or does he want to take BruNO into his team? Not sure. The thing is, you can now generally interpret that in both ways. And I suppose that's the beauty of BruNO. Even amongst the analytics folk.
Yes.
Salah getting rested. Salah's... we can actually talk about that in a moment. Like, Salah's minutes have been absolutely insane this season. At 32, playing 90 minutes a game, even versus Bologna. Like, why exactly does he have to play? Maybe because Chiesa's out and they literally don't have available substitutes.
Yeah, I think that is the case for this game.
Salah,
yeah,
honestly, you absolute monster.
Yeah.
And please stop scoring goals. Thank you very much. See, Hunt, hope you're doing well.
Let's wait for one game.
Yeah, please stop. Someone's on Delap. I think Delap is actually one of the most interesting picks around this sort of run. Just like Leif Davis is as well, if you actually need a defender to cover a few games. And 8 and 10 are really good Davis weeks, which applies to Delap. Jay Wavy says, is the defense of Gabriel, Guardiola, Robertson, Lewis, and Dunk crazy? Not at all. I mean, it just looks really strong. So I think one of the issues that I was sort of dealing with, like when I owned Trent, was like, yeah, I guess I'm throwing myself into these benching dilemma situations, which wasn't ideal. And so when I had BruNO gone, I felt like I had a void in my team, and I didn't necessarily want to fill the void with Bowen. So I felt pretty comfortable dropping someone like Trent. But you never know how those minutes will change, because I think, as Schadenfreude has pointed out, Robertson's minutes could become dicier as the fixture congestion piles up. And that will also apply to Lewis and Guardiola in some way. So maybe you'll net benefit by having 4 good defenders. And then question...
Yildiz says Holland over Salah because they play against Fulham at home. Yeah, I mean, of course.
Yeah, just because Salah is
Oh,
actually
he
way too
also
good.
says, sorry, Pablo also says, I'm banning United players until they actually play good football. So this is what we discussed earlier. If you want to go back to the stream, I'll timestamp it later if you want to have a look. But that's exactly what the conversation was. So I'm not going to rehash it. But it was a
I
rant.
think I
If
can understand why people are cautious and they want to wait until they see United play good football. But generally speaking, the fixtures are somewhat there after the Villa game, and so
yeah.
like if you think that there's going to be some value from a mid-table team performance-wise from that run of games, then they're still worth it per se. And I think I would just literally point out to Man United last season, they weren't significantly good, but I think people probably had somewhat more confidence in United players. Maybe not as much, I guess, in someone like Rashford, who clearly was having a poor season, but I still think BruNO was someone we weren't so in despair about last season, despite
Mm.
United also being pretty poor, all things considered.
I feel like the reactions people had last season about BruNO were completely unjustified, and they were reacting as if he did what he did this season. Because their reactions
Yeah,
from last season, I could understand this season. We've discussed this so many times, but he scored against Burnley 3 bonus points. He scored against Fulham 2 bonus points. The first 8 or 9, he had a goal and assist against Nottingham Forest in game week 2. So there were a lot of game weeks where he actually did return.
yeah.
It's not like he wasn't playing. I mean, he always plays well, but he was actually returning as well.
I
So
it's true.
very surprising last season.
I guess in
Sorry.
light of the fact that all of our other picks were doing so well, it felt like it was justified. Whereas now
Could
we
be,
are
could be.
absolutely scraping at scraps. But yeah.
Yes, yeah.
All right. Going forward, Zubi says he's on 2 free transfers. He's on Guardiola and Holland. Plan is Foden, Solanke for Salah, and Delap. I guess the weird thing
I think
is,
DCL maybe, but yeah, I would
like,
defer to you.
moving out
Yeah.
of Solanke does feel a bit odd to me. Oh no, but sorry, he's going Foden and
No, yeah, that's what I
Solanke.
mean. Yeah,
Oh, McCann's still there.
yeah.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, fine. Moving out of DCL, I think eventually makes sense. Or Delap actually, if you're gonna do it on Game Week 9, because I think that was the preferred
Mm,
transfer. Um,
correct.
Dr. FPL says, just wondering if DB is washed. Absolutely, he's washed.
Yeah.
He was watched the moment he entered
Maybe.
grammar school. Throwback's father. Not sure if I keep BruNO and have free transfers next game week or replace him. I think genuinely, a lot of people are very set on keeping BruNO because I think it's a good bet against the field, and he's really not as
Mm,
bad as we make him out to be. Like he's not a 2-3 point merchant. But if you want to go against BruNO and sell him, like this is the week to do it. It's Aston Villa away. It's probably the worst fixture out of the next 5. Then take that opportunity. Um, But yeah, like if you want to go for Gordon and we get some sort of positive Isaac news that sort of directly impacts Gordon, consider him or even someone like Bowen. But I think one of the issues that I genuinely had, like looking at Bowen Gordon, was do I really want to own Bowen Gordon? And really, the answer in my head was not really. So yeah, I
okay,
took
so
drastic
that's actually
measures.
interesting, right?
Yeah,
For Gordon, because last season he was actually a very good pick for most
yeah,
of the season, given that he
yeah.
later was on set pieces and took some penalties. This season, because United have done so badly that Newcastle have gone under the radar,
True.
but Newcastle as a team have also been pretty dire.
They've been awful. So have West Ham. Yeah, but I think everyone's aware of that.
But West Ham, we don't have any expectations anyway, right? But with Newcastle, because we started with Isaac and people started with Lewis Hall and
Yeah,
probably
people are
Gordon as
really aware
well.
of how bad Newcastle been. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just thinking maybe Gordon is also in that category of BruNO where okay, his EV is not bad, but it's not nowhere near
I
BruNO.
guess it's because Gordon's
So
actually delivered something so far, right? He scored
he
2 goals, I
has, he
think.
has. To be
So
honest, he has. He has scored 2 goals, one against City as well, which is quite huge. Especially if for someone like me who had no City defenders in his team. So
right.
I do understand why Gordon is being given some sort of leash, unlike BruNO is given some points at least.
Yeah, that's fair.
David says, okay, so David has actually, I don't know if he did this accidentally, but he's saying thoughts on Havertz captain. I've Holland anyway, so covers 50% and see Havertz as a big upgrade. So I'm seeing Havertz as goal Havertz, so I'm going to take
Okay.
or goat Havertz. So yeah,
I mean,
um, no, I don't think so. The
it's
EV
not
is not there, right? I
exactly
mean,
the pick that I would love to go for, but
mm,
is he like an awful captaincy pick? Probably not.
No, he's not. Because
probably
90 is almost guaranteed,
I think
right?
he's a top
90 minutes are
5
almost
pick this
guaranteed.
week. Havertz is just about.
Who's the fifth pick after Salah? Is it Havertz?
I think it should be Havertz if you adjust his minutes, in my personal opinion. But who knows? He's played a lot of minutes of football. Like, do you think that he could actually get a rest? Like an earlier.
I would actually die if he gets a rest.
Yes.
Oh my
not a rest, but like an early rest or a late rest.
Look, he's going to play left back for Germany, so it doesn't matter. He's going to play center forward for Arsenal. I'm kidding, but no, that's actually a legitimate point, because if he plays 80, that actually it makes him a complete no-no for captaincy, even if you do want to take a risk.
I think I would go Holland though, 100%. Like it's like
100%. Yeah.
Because I think owning Havertz itself is the 50% you really want in terms of effective ownership.
It is.
Not
it
the
is.
not the 100% of Holland, but 200.
And Holland got subbed at 60 as well, so he's definitely going to play 80 plus, unless he scores like a hat trick or something. Yeah.
Props between him, Mavididi. I think McNeil is literally one of the most boring picks in the game, but God bless him for scoring that goal, which was like Arda Güler-esque. And I'm using a young wonder kid to compare. Like, we just need to say Carvalho is probably the interesting one. I don't think necessarily has a great ceiling. It sort of reminds me of actually going Mikolenko on the wildcard itself. To anyone who did that, congratulations to you. But that's sort of my thoughts on that. And then actually, is my mic lower than my co-host? I think that's just because, unfortunately, I've been speaking away from my mic. But that's a me problem, so I apologize for that. But yeah, I would go Carvalho. Assuming that you're going to rotate anyways, and that's pretty much it. Because Mavididi, yeah, maybe there's something wrong with my mic.
So it wasn't just me, because I thought it was my internet. So we actually missed everything you said after Carvalho, and all I heard was ceiling, and then I heard the rest of it. So
is it a lot better now?
It is okay now.
Okay.
But there was a brief period where you
weird, right?
Were completely inaudible.
Probably need to get that fixed somehow.
I mean, we are at the end of the stream anyway, so I suppose that's a problem for next week.
Who would you go with?
Carvalho.
And honestly, Mavididi is Steve Cooper is a terrorist as well. So yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah. So see, here's the thing, and I've spoken with someone about this. If someone can tell me why Mavididi was rested to begin with or dropped to begin with, I will be on board.
It was nonsense, because he was actually prospectively their best player anyways, like from an attacking point of view. And you've gone and benched him for 2 games.
Complete nonsense. So you are spot on.
Yeah.
As long as Cooper's there, I'm not going there. I mean, Vardy 1 week was fine for people who went there, because that's a different thing. He's a cult. He has cult status at the club.
Cult status.
That's true. He absolutely does. So yeah, not going anywhere near.
All right. I think that's a good place to end off. Thank you guys for tuning in. Apologies about some of the audio issues near the end. But yeah, take care and have a good game week.
See you next week. Bye.